we'll talk a little bit more about strategies later today. So we've talked about staff, we've talked about the emerging manager programs, and finally we want to talk a little bit about engagement. A cornerstone of our efforts is...
Ken.
Yes?
I have a question. Tom.
Sure.
Yeah. One of the things that would be interesting, given the experience with the emerging manager universe, is to get some understanding of how composition of workforce has changed in the kind of, quote, mainstream investment management business, and particularly in sort of the PM level, whether the opportunity set has just changed. I don't have any illusions that the number of Wall Street CEOs that have become diverse has changed very much, but my sense is at the investment management and portfolio management level, the world has changed slightly, and that would be worth seeing as a contrast.
Yes, we think you're right, and with respect to engaging our managers, they're much more willing to give us that data. You'll see, and when we come back in June, that will likely be part of the program, is to survey our managers and get that information back from them on a regular basis, and see that change coming. And as the pool of diversity starts at the lower to mid and upper levels of management, it will change over time. And we're seeing that, but it hasn't been as fast as we had hoped maybe 10 years ago.
No, I mean...
And anecdotally, I would say that we're seeing some of the same evidence. One of the trends that we're seeing with our managers and managers is that they're beginning to look, rather than just at firm ownership, they're beginning to look through to that portfolio manager level and say, maybe we need to broaden our definition of diversity from ownership to senior staff, and particularly at the portfolio manager level. But we'll be happy to get that information together for you. All right, thanks. So going back to engagement, as I started to say, one of the cornerstones of the investment branch diversity effort is engagement. And over the years, staff regularly and continually engages with portfolio companies, our business partners, and affinity groups, and we've built really good relationships over the years. Just a couple of words about our CalSTRS corporate governance unit. As you know, they're widely recognized in the industry as a leader in engaging companies to further diversity on corporate boards. CalSTRS began a joint effort with CalPERS in 2014, engaged with 131 California companies who are identified as having no women on their boards. The engagement was very successful. 27 of the companies added at least one woman to their boards of directors within 1 year of the initial engagement. Additionally, as a member of the 30% Coalition, the CalSTRS led the latest initiative on to have companies seek and place women on their boards of directors.
Can I ask a little more about that? Because it's something I've been thinking about quite a bit. And because I really applaud the work that we've done. I mean, I feel like when I first came on the board, I mean, we've always had a strong reputation, I think, around corporate governance and Anne's leadership. And I mean, everywhere I go, I hear this, and I think it's wonderful. But I think I'm always, I go to some of these conferences, and I sort of wonder. I feel like this world of diversity gets kind of, it's sort of like a boutique or something, it's sort of like, we know it's important, and obviously many of us think it's integral to just not diversity in terms of race or gender, but just like our board, like having diverse views and ways of thinking and background and work history, and that helps us make better decisions. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about how do we get beyond just adding a woman to a board and really being able to measure the value that brings to the decision. I know that's very subjective, but I think I'm sensitive to not just being, adding more women or adding more diverse members, but actually adding value to the board or the process. And Joy and I were just at this women's private equity conference in Half Moon Bay. I think some of the staff were there, and it was really interesting for women to talk about. You know, you don't see a lot of, if you don't see women in these roles, then you don't think you could be a private equity, you don't think you could be a CEO of a private equity firm. And so I think it's really critical that we develop women and people of color and just diverse people in these roles. I guess I get often asked, you know, what are the metrics, or what's the data that shows that it actually adds value? And so how do you deal with that question, I guess?
I think I would point to one of the efforts that we've been thinking about, talking about, and we took our first step. You'll know from Chris's slide this morning that we collaborated with SSGA, State Street Global Advisors, and on March 8th, we co-hosted an event that was called Beyond Talk. And it was all about, we had gender diversity research experts there that we listened to, and also we took part in exercises that focused on eliminating unintended gender bias. And so what we look forward to doing is continuing to provide that training to staff, and also looking at our recruiting strategy to make sure that we are gaining access to diverse pools of candidates for job openings, and really getting this to become, as you say, part of the fabric of what we do on a day-to-day basis. And as we continue to work in that direction, I think right now statistics are pretty difficult to come by. For instance, one of the steps, again, that SSGA took was to start this gender diversity index. That will give us something to measure. But I think you point out a really, crucial problem, which is that the statistics are not necessarily as available as we'd like them to be. So we just need to keep working down this path, and hopefully we will have, as we continue to develop, the statistics available to us. And I don't know if Chris wants to add anything to that.
No, part of the goal is to actually help consolidate the stuff that's out there from McKinsey, from especially the Clayman Institute that's done some very good work on the unintended gender bias. But moving the needle, I think as we presented at the conference, in the last 5 years, gender diversity has gotten worse, not better. And so it's calling attention to that and being, I think, more direct and more overt. So it is... Like corporate governance, that's why we realize it's not a short-term issue. This is a long-term issue. We're going to be at maybe at some point we'll achieve some more of a balance. But as we pointed out, the problem of diversity on Wall Street literally starts all the way down at grade school. And Wall Street is right or wrong. Wall Street is villainized by Hollywood, and though there are not any good positive examples for youth. To look at Wall Street and say, hey, I want to be part of that. So, we're working literally, as we did last week. We celebrated Crenshaw High School. If you don't know, Crenshaw High School has a fast track program. I know Betty was there. There are many representatives where we have led and worked with a very wonderful high school teacher who has taken kids out, put them in the fast track program. The investment professionals in LA formed a group and they raise money. They mentor these kids. All of them are going on to college. What I still find absolutely, and this is the fourth class of high school kids, very few finance majors, maybe 1 out of 8 that's a finance major. So it's a huge achievement that kids are going to college. But they're still not necessarily picking the investment or the finance business. And so that we can't solve by ourselves, but it's still, we'll just keep trying to increase the supply through the colleges, and then that way there's more opportunity.
Yeah, no, that was going to be my next comment, though, is just from the elementary, junior high. I know we've talked about financial literacy for young people, but I was just thinking, being at this women's conference, it was just, I just thought, as a girl growing up, you look at finance and you just automatically think, a white guy. It's just, there's a stereotype about the financial industry, and I think it's an intimidating place for a woman, or I think of LGBT stuff, and, for anyone that looks different than that, it feels kind of like a challenging place. So I do think, for young people, even private equity as an asset class was kind of seen as more intimidating than doing something that's, fixed income or something for some of the women. So it's just it's interesting to see some of these biases. And anyway, Nora.
So something, I guess along those same lines, I think that as we're looking at 131 companies are engaged in increasing women on boards, what do they mean by that? I think I would be interested in knowing a little bit more about that, because I think there's a difference between having one person on the board who's a woman or a woman of color or a person that has a diverse background, and having 2 or 3 people who could actually, diversity of thinking and having different perspectives and where you come from. A lot of the folks who happen to serve on the corporate boards, who happen to be of diverse backgrounds, happen to be the same 3 people on a lot of these boards. So there's some interesting perspective on that. And so how do we build this leadership? And as in our role around corporate governance, what are the questions that we're asking for building those pipelines on either committees or advisory boards or other roles that may be of interest to up-and-comers that may be interested in getting into those roles later on? And I'm not sure that there are real pipelines for that or conversations that are happening other than, in certain times of the year, people coming together and having conversations. So I would be interested in knowing a little bit more about that. And then internally for around the staff engagement, what are we doing in terms of retention to also include mentorship and development of our staff? I know there are some executive opportunities, but as people are entering, I think one of the biggest things that I've learned in my development as a professional is there were people that believed that I knew that I could be something that I didn't even know that I could be. And so I think it's who mentors you, who brings you under the wing to be able to, have you believe that you actually can do this because you have the skills and the talent to be able to do that work. And so I'm not sure really how you, if you have some of that information, I would be interested in knowing a little bit more about that as we're developing and having conversations and we go further.
It's a great lead-in because right after this in corporate governance is Ann and Mary to talk about exactly what we're doing
Our thunder.
at your request. So, and
But
then
we
I'd
do
be
know,
happy,
yeah.
and I'll talk more about it probably in my CIO evaluation at the end of the year, our internal mentoring program that we're doing within our staff.
Yeah, because we know how corporate boards typically kind of self-select, right? So if that perpetually happens, then we've got a problem. Harry.
Madam Chair, I don't know if I want to, I don't know how far Ms. Ronan and Mr. DeRay are with their slides. Maybe
One slide left.
Why don't you finish your presentation
Okay.
and I'll, because
Sounds
that's
good.
a comment and a question.
Great.
Thank you.
One of the other areas where CalSTRS has really worked, and we've inspired other institutions to increase their diversity, is through our work as advisors and speakers at numerous events. And we've engaged directly with hundreds of people in the investment industry, and as I said before, developed very good relationships. And I'm going to read a little bit here because I want to call your attention to a few of these initiatives and then some of the awards that we have received. For many years, CalSTRS has representative CalSTRS have served on the Hispanic Heritage Foundation's Leader on Fast Track, Robert Twigo's Foundation's Women in Leadership Groundbreakers, and New America Alliance's annual Wall Street Summit, and many other initiatives. And we've received notable recognition, including the AIM Champion and Chairman's Awards, the NASP Pace Setters Award, the National Association of Investment Companies Award of Excellence, as well as the NAA Distinguished Service Award. And as I said, we continue to build on these relationships, and you see on the slide here some of the examples of some of the initiatives that we've worked really hard on. As far as next steps, we will be coming back to you as early as June to talk to you about our new plan. But for now, what we've done is we've put here on this slide a few of the ideas that we have, and of course we'd welcome your input, guidance, and suggestions. But to Nora's point, working on a recruiting strategy, the student intern program, staff training on an ongoing basis, and then our mentor program. And I'm happy to say that we now have a CalSTRS Human Resources Diversity Coordinator who will be working as a member of our team. And so we're going to have this additional help from the CalSTRS organization as a whole. So we're very excited about that. And as far as training, I've already mentioned the event that we hosted with State Street, which sort of kicked off our diversity training with a bang.
So that's what we're doing internally and externally. We will we found it across asset classes. Engaging our managers and discussion with our managers has been helpful. Discussion with our consultants is helpful too, and also we are very cognizant that other major pension funds are striving to do something similar, and so engagement with them is helpful as well. So we're just leveraging those relationships, and what's key from an investment standpoint is to think outside the box and to look at different ways to try to get more investment in these areas. And so we'll learn from each other. Yeah, I will say smashing us together, as Chris said, does help us get some ideas. For instance, that what corporate governance does on boards, it is very simple for us to take that and say, even in the real estate industry, look what's happening over here. You guys should be striving to do the same things. And we believe there is a tipping point at some point. We're going to try bottom up, try top down, try to get capital in, and we believe that there will be a tipping point that this movement will come and grow at a faster pace. And that's our presentation.
Okay.
And we hope that it's been helpful to you, and we welcome your questions.
I have some questions, but I've got Harry and Control you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So, observation, acknowledgement, and a challenge. Observation, internal staff, a lot of things make me very proud to be a board member at CalSTRS. I can't think of anything that makes me prouder than when I look at our staff and I look at the diversity of our staff. It just moves me. It moves me, and it proves it's my language. That's who I am. It's all across from the gender diversity to ethnic diversity. Just look, it's just fantastic. It's a replica of California. It's who we are, and I think that says a lot about, and it makes me feel proud. Secondly, I think Ms. Sheehan has done a wonderful job in corporate governance and moving the agenda around diversity on corporate boards. More needs to be done, but I think it can be argued quite convincingly that what has happened probably would not have happened had it not been for CalSTRS, CalPERS, and others that have been pushing this agenda the last 5 years. More needs to be done. I think Mr. Ehlman has been courageous, bold, exemplary in his comments about women and diversity in corporate boards and the need for gender diversity. Perhaps it's because he's lived it, he's seen it, he's a dad of 3 daughters, that it's in his DNA, and I think our system should be proud of the statements that he's made publicly to the press, both in written press and in the television media. And that when Christopher speaks on Wall Street listens. They may not agree, but they'll listen, and they'll take his calls, and they want to ask him, what are you doing at CalSTRS, and why are you doing this? So that helps us with our footprint and makes me as a board member proud. Last year, I sat in at a private meeting at the Milk and Global Conference, and I think Ms. Sheehan was in it, and it was led by Katie Riley from the Milken Institute, and it was all. Katie said to me, "Harry, would you be so kind as to sit in on this this meeting about women leadership in the C-suite?" And I said, "Katie, you're asking me? Of course I will, because you've been so kind to me throughout the years, and you're asking me to support you, and I certainly will." So I sat in on that meeting, and at many of the events at the conference, the gender equation is usually 70-80 men, 20%, 30% women. In this forum, it was the inverse. It was 80 to 90%. I tell you, if you don't think there's a difference in conversation, in dialogue, in style, in temperament, in discourse between how women are thinking and talking about issues and how men do, that was compelling to me. It was a true dialogue. People were talking about emotional intelligence. It was powerful. It's left an imprint on me. So I think that's very powerful, and I would encourage people who have an opportunity to sit in on those events to do so. I think at the core of some of our critics who would like to see us do more. I think it really comes down to allocation of capital and putting more CalSTRS dollars in to work with women-owned firms or ethnically diverse firms. And I think there are challenges to that. And some of that we'll talk about in closed session. I would challenge our consultants to make sure that people are getting an equal shot, a fair opportunity to get before our staff to discuss who they are, what they're doing, why they think they can add value to CalSTRS. We need to be sure that that's happening, that we aren't having people who are gatekeepers that perhaps have blind spots or are in a comfortable zone. We know who we know, and so that's just a challenge. That's my final, almost my last point. And then a secondary challenge would be, I think Mr. Elman is correct. I don't know to what extent this organization, it falls into our bucket of responsibilities. It's certainly not on the higher level of responsibilities of this board or the system. But I do think there's an opportunity to partner with our stakeholders, the teacher associations, the school boards associations, the administrators, to talk about how we can work together to provide, because it does begin, these beliefs, these ideas about who you can be, what you can be, the images that we're giving our young people at an earlier, in their youth. I'm the proud father of two beautiful girls, and the sky's the limit for them. They can be whoever they want to be, with the right support, love, encouragement, guidance, etc. Not every young woman gets that. Not every person of color gets that message and gets that opportunity. It's not our primary responsibility, but our stakeholders are the people who are teaching the youth. So maybe there's a nice way we can partner with them. We should think about that. Thank you.
Could you flip back to that last slide? I was curious about some of the restructuring elements. And I don't know how much work you've already done on this, but I think I'd be curious to see with those last two elements, how that would impact the women and minority-owned firms that we're currently engaged with. So, yeah.
And we'll be talking a little bit more about strategy
a
little bit later. And
Okay.
so we'll have
With
some
some
information
examples.
with some examples. And then when we come back to you, we'll want to take your input, your feedback, and to help weave that into the plan that we're going to be building. And then we'll bring that back to you.
Yeah. Okay. And then I thought, and I don't know if there's an openness to this, but it seems like, there's kind of this universe too of smaller firms that actually have demonstrated track record, but aren't necessarily wanting to grow and want to stay small. And so I'm just wondering if there's an openness to maybe continuing to work with those types of firms on a longer term basis and seeing whether there might be some opportunity with that thought, because right now with the kind of up and out strategy, I think we might be able to hit more of the diversity if we engage with some of these smaller firms on a longer term basis.
Tom?
My general reaction is that, like Harry's, I mean, this is a record and an effort to really be proud of on all sorts of levels. Most notably, the way we walk the talk, and we really have a diverse workforce. And only to, sometimes as you confront the outside world, it feels like you're trying to boil the ocean. And I'd like to urge you not to give up because of that. On the other hand, if you feel like you're trying to boil the ocean, maybe it means you need to be a little bit more targeted and focused to make sure that progress is being made.
That's a good word. Send that in there. Great. All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Just keeping in the theme of diversity, we've got Anne. Oh, I'm sorry, Jennifer, did you want to say something? Sorry. What's that? You guys go ahead and come on up, Anne, and Mary, come on up, and then Jennifer, go ahead.
So the world does change.
It's not working. You can use your classroom voice.
My teacher voice. So Jennifer Baker with the California Teachers Association. I just wanted to actually thank Trustee Keeley for his comments. Our members actually get to see the future every day. And the future of California is about diversification. More than 50% of students in kindergarten are Latinos. So the amount of diversity in our classrooms is dramatically increasing. That is going to change the markets of the future, not only in California, but looking at the rest of the nation and the rest of the world. You definitely see increases in diversity. So it's really an economic imperative. If we're going to make sure, as an institution, that CalSTRS is ready for the future, that you are looking at this, because this is not an issue of whether or not we're going to try to do what some may or may not believe is appropriate or politically correct. This is about economics. And if you want to make sure that you're going to be ready for the future in 10, 20 years, it's absolutely imperative. And so we encourage you to embrace the work that needs to be done. And thank you very much, CalSTRS Board, for having this conversation.
All right. Hi, Ann. Hi, Mary.
Good afternoon, all. Ann Sheehan, Director of Corporate Governance. I want to introduce Mary Morris, who has joined our team in January of this year after having spent 21 years at CalPERS, our friends across the river, 13 of those in the investment office in the corporate governance unit. Mary has taken over the responsibility as our diversity. She has the diversity assignment for us, so she is helping me with the 30% coalition, with the work at the SEC, work in Congress. We actually had a call yesterday with Congresswoman Maloney's office, who had done legislation on more women on corporate boards. So she has really stepped up and is really helping in support of our efforts on diversity and helped put this item together. So the item that we are presenting today really responds to Ms. Vargas's request last fall about us expanding our efforts on diversity in the corporate governance unit to diversity in the workforce. And really, it dovetails very much with the work that we do in terms of working with companies and talking to them about their workforce, their human capital, because the workforce of any organization obviously is key to their success. And so we have put together for you a program of reaching out to companies and talking to them about how they're building a diverse workforce, how they're building their workforce, what they are doing to make sure they're building the pipeline. I think, Ms. Hendricks, you said, how do we get the people who then will move into the C-suite or the boardrooms? And it really is starting at the lowest level as they're starting in the companies. So we have met with a number of companies, talking to them about their programs, companies that have been successful. We've talked to Apple, we've talked to Prudential, we've talked to a number of companies, their HR people, some of their investor relations people, their diversity officers, and the like, to see how do we frame our program. So our first goal, we put a draft, we're working with a draft of the letter. We've circulated it to some folks to see, are we asking the right questions, to begin a dialogue with some companies about how do we build this program. We want to focus on, and apropos of the discussion you just had, financial services industry, because we have relationships with so many of the financial services providers as partners of ours, as well as corporate holdings in our portfolio, and then also technology companies, because that is one, obviously we have a large technology sector here in California, and some of them are probably not doing as well on diversity in their workforce. I'm sure you've seen some of the articles. So we thought we would start with those two, instead of, as to use Tom's term, my son's favorite term, boiling the ocean, beginning to sort of try and focus on a couple of industry sectors, and then we will expand it. So Mary, I don't know if you want to add a couple of things, and then we're happy to answer any questions that you may have. Ms. Vargas, we can come back in June and talk a little bit more about what we have done on diversity. I don't want to take the committee's time this afternoon, but we have done a lot on this, and so we're happy to come back with a presentation in June or July or whenever it fits into the agenda to talk more about what we have done.
Couple of points I really wanted to make, and thank you. I'm really happy to be here. I'm excited about joining CalSTRS' team, and
I also have a invested interest because I do have a nephew who is a teacher at Sarah High School in San Diego. So thank you for that. I think the couple points that I really wanted to make really quickly, and I'm very cognizant of time, is what Anne mentioned, was that this is about a risk and opportunity and business needs, not necessarily about the idea of a social issue. I think it's important for us to point out that, and it really is about how do we get businesses to think smarter, work harder. In our agenda item, there's supporting research, and I think you probably all have seen that. And all of our actions to date, I think Chris has mentioned all of our actions to date. Anne mentioned about the SEC petition for rulemaking. Since that, Mary Jo White, there was a letter to Mary Jo White on ranking members Maxine Waters and Sherrod Brown, and they brought the request as well. And what Anne mentioned also was we just spoke with staff at Carolyn Maloney's office on Bill H.R. 4718, which will help our request in expanding what the SEC requires at the board level for disclosure. I think just really quickly on our points that we want to focus, we really do want to get down to the level of the C-suite, the senior level, but it really is about the pipeline, and I think you mentioned that earlier. What are we doing? What is the importance? I think Chris has mentioned, I think Candace mentioned about all the different programs that we're working on. But so when we reach out to all these companies, we're going to focus on programs and policies utilized to recruit a diverse workforce. What is the human capital strategies to nurture a vital, diverse pipeline? What's the human capital strategies, whether in its infancy or mature stage, to ensure a long-term evolution plan in building a diverse senior executive staff pipeline? And then what is the board's oversight on the diversity? I think, human capital, of course, is our most important resource that we all have as companies, as entities. And so I think it's really important that we focus on that. I think we mentioned that it's going to be on information and technology companies because those have historically been underrepresented. So just a couple of quick census data statistics, overall, in the technology companies, there's only about 29% women that are represented. In the technical field of technology, only 15.6%, and then in leadership, only 22.5%. So we have a long ways to go, and we really want to make sure that those technology companies, and then look at what are the issues. Why are they not able to build out that pipeline? And then the finance area, we talked about, this is a report from Catalyst, and there's only 2.1% are women are CEOs, and on the board there's only 18.7%, and at the executive level 29.3%. So again, what it is about, how do we move that pipeline? So Anne mentioned our draft letter that we're working on. We're circulating that to some other companies to help us build out that expertise and also that liaison. So when we're reaching out to companies, they feel like they want to share that information. And so we want to move forward with our engagement strategies to not only look at talent management, succession planning, and pipeline of gender and racial diversity. So with that, we'll take any questions. So thank you.
And can you just give me an example, an anecdote of how you talk to a CEO or when I talk to people on boards that are on mostly private boards in general, and I know this is a stereotype, so just forgive me, but in general, it's guys that know each other over a long period of time, and they're like, hey, I'm going to retire. Let's get Jim on the board or something. It tends to be a very word of mouth. It's a very kind of collegial, somebody knows somebody. And when, that happens, you typically know someone that either looks like you or, And so I just wonder, can you give me an example of how you try and move that needle? Because that seems like a pretty tough nut to crack. And with Tom's great analogy of not, boiling the ocean, how do you figure out where to go? I love the idea of focusing on a few areas like tech. I think that makes a lot of sense. But even with some of the young guys like a Facebook, I could only imagine what that conversation is like. So could you just give an example of how you strategically think about making progress there?
Let me give you a couple of examples. A couple of things. When we meet with companies, and it'll be either incoming requests that okay, they're doing a roadshow and they'd like to bring their team. Usually it could be the CEO, investor relations, maybe a board member, and then some other folks. We put a whole agenda of items together when we do an engagement. Now, that's separate and aside from proxy season, but we always have board succession, board diversity on there, and talk to them about how do they make sure they have a diverse board. If they don't have any diversity on the board, what are they doing to make sure that they do? Where do they source their candidates? You are right. I think one of the perennial issues on finding board members is they want a comfort and collegiality with bringing someone into a corporate boardroom or a private board. But what we try and do is work with them on other ways to get comfortable with individuals they may not know. So we're involved in a number of groups that try and mentor would-be board members with some current board members to socialize them. We try and get them to look beyond their traditional source of finding pools of candidates. There aren't that many women CEOs, so if you want a former CEO on your board, which many boards do, there aren't that many to go around, and we're very concerned about board members being overboarded. So if you only have Meg Whitman, I only want her on one other outside board. I don't want her on 5 boards because I want her running HP or another female CEO. So we try and encourage them to look beyond in terms of the C-suite level, maybe a chief operating officer. Sheryl Sandberg is a perfect example. She is on the Disney board now, and she also is high up at Facebook. So what are some other candidates that you could have beyond your typical one? There is, but it is breaking kind of that long time practice. And I understand boards want someone that they're comfortable with, but having that diversity of opinion and not having someone who they've been all in your social circles forever, you're not going to get that diversity of thinking inside the boardroom, which is what we want. But we have to work to come up with a process for them that gets them comfortable. We also are working with the search firms. Mary and I are, and it's mentioned in here, are working with a number of other funds. In terms of working with the search firms, for them committing to a code of practice like they have done in the United Kingdom to get more diverse slates of individuals. For some of you, Harry will remember this, there used to be what was called the Rooney Rule in the NFL when they were trying to bring greater diversity to the coaching staffs of these football teams. They required at least to bring one diverse candidate to the slate. So we have suggested a type of Rooney Rule for search firms to make sure that they bring 1 or 2 female candidates or diverse candidates to the slate as they present them to a nominating committee. So, Sharon, there is no one size fits all to this, but it is a constant discussion and constant prodding, reminding them, and I think somebody said this earlier, one female on a board is not the solution. That's why we work with the 30% Club or the 30% Coalition. That's not a quota, it's sort of it is a target for us to try and get to a benchmark of at least 30% diversity on a board, because the studies have shown, Credit Suisse and McKinsey, who are constantly, that once you get to that 30% level, it really does change the dynamic inside the boardroom, and you get a better decision-making process. And from our corporate governance perspective, it is that robust decision-making process that we want on our behalf for those corporate boards. I want the best thinking inside the boardroom for the portfolio companies that we own. It leads to better decision making. So there is no one solution to this. It's a constant struggle that we work with, and we're improving as we go. These statistics are not as fast as we would like. So there are some other things we can begin to think about. After a while, do you say we're going to vote against the whole board if you don't get some diversity within a year or two? Because board members don't like to be voted against on corporate boards. They really don't. But it's a powerful tool that investors can look at. So those are some of the things we're beginning to look at.
That's great. I'll put a line of
I hope that
folks.
addresses some of your questions.
Nora?
So I just want to say thank you for all this information. I know many of my colleagues in the past have also been doing a lot of work around this. I wanted just to say that I appreciate the recommendations, and I wanted to just ask on number 2 of the recommendations when they're doing strategies to nurture a vital, diverse pipeline. I almost emailed you this article that I saw about a week or two ago about a young woman named Julissa Arce, who was an intern in Texas and then became a vice president of Goldman Sachs, right? And she has a wonderful story. And one of the things that I heard when I was at NAA at the conference in December was that there really isn't a lot of recruitment and pipeline sort of opportunities for a lot of the young folks who are in community colleges or universities. So it would be interesting to see, just to ask the question about sort of what are these big companies doing to engage students who may not be coming from Harvard, Princeton, or some of the other places, because some of my students at Southwestern College are extremely talented and would be great to get into these pipelines. So just a little pitch for, I think, some of the amazing students that go to our community colleges who may not be on that sort of journey at this time, but if they knew about these opportunities that they could. And so I just wanted to share that because I think that there is a need to sort of broaden that and just really ask the question from a different perspective. So yes, I have internships, but do we have internships that are really reflective of the diverse communities that we serve in general?
Thanks. Good point.
Thank you.
Joy.
Thank you. So I just wanted to just compliment you both. Mary, welcome to the team, and I'm excited to read about the recommendations that you've got, because as Sharon mentioned, I think I recognize the importance of having these targets that we set for adding diversity to corporate boards, but it really is not just, it doesn't just stop there. It looks at how that's woven through their entire workforce, and so I think getting into the companies and looking at what their longer term strategies are for recruitment and retention are really important. I guess one of the questions I have is, have you thought about how we might think about measuring progress or making progress in this area, as where you can have some quantitative targets with boards, workforce diversity. Is that what we're thinking, or are there best practices, seeing adoption of more best practices at more companies? And any thoughts on that?
Yeah, good question. And a couple of thoughts. I would say for us, the second is kind of what we're thinking to begin with initially, is sort of best practices. What companies do this well? How have they built those programs? And for us learning as we get out and talk to other companies who maybe don't have diverse workforces, so-and-so has tried this, or this is what they've done. Do you have a program like this? So really having a more dialogue with the companies and beginning to sort of have a baseline of what are some good programs that work, and then also getting from the companies, how has that resulted in better performance for the company? What do they see they get out of having this diverse workforce moving up? We spent time with Prudential Financial, who has a very robust program, and they've begun to show us how they can sort of benchmark the results inside their company as a result of this, as a result of their efforts on diversity. And theirs is very broad. It is, gender diversity, ethnic diversity, LGBT, all across the board. So it's been very helpful. So what we've done is reached out to the relationships that we've had with some of the companies that we have a good corporate governance relationship and begin to develop knowledgeable baseline cases of what to do. Now, on the boards and the C-suites, and that's why the SHE index is so helpful to us, because when I go out and talk, I can say we've put our capital behind this, and this is what it takes to get into that index, into that ETF, and how do your companies measure up against the numbers and the requirements that we look for in there. So on the corporate boards and the C-suite, because in the proxies, they have to put in the named executive officers as well as the corporate board members. So those are easy to sort of measure and see what progress they're making. So on the progress and how we'll measure this effort, we'll get back to you in terms of as we go through it and learn more.
Thank you. I think the only thing I want to add is I just kind of echoing Harry's comments, I think when you stitch the whole story together, everything we're doing internally with our intern programs, recruitment, retention, mentoring, what we're doing on the corporate governance front, I just think it's such a compelling story, and it's I think we're all proud of it.
Yeah, and the one thing I have to add to your compliments to Chris in terms of his team, it is so helpful when we get out and talk to especially financial companies to talk about what our senior team looks like in the investment office. because we have such diversity amongst the senior team. And so when we go in and talk to other companies, we can sort of, we walk the talk, and it's very powerful.
Thank you.
When he read this item, the treasurer thought that it focused primarily on gender diversity. He just wants to make sure that when you go out and engage these companies, you also plan on engaging on racial
Yes.
and ethnic diversity too.
Yeah,
I'm
we'll
sure
make
the
that
answer is
clear.
yes.
Okay. I think a lot of our work has it's been all but 30% coalition. Some of the other ones are gender, but point well taken.
Tom.
My reaction is a lot like Joy's. I mean, this is terrific work, and this is a very crude and probably off example, but there's sort of a 1%, 99% scale here when you talk about boards opportunities versus employment opportunities generally. And I think we should try really hard to emphasize employment opportunity generally and find partners to drive that home. It is the future of American business. It's certainly the future of business in California. And there's a good governance and investor argument behind it. And it's a lot harder to force progress for the 99% than the 1.
You can say that again. I mean it. Great. One more. Harry.
Just lend my full support to Tom's comment of identifying partners. I think we're in a unique position to find folks that would really like to partner with us on a meaningful scale. Not only our logical stakeholder partners, but other partners that can bring different resources to bear to address moving the needle. So I think the staff can think critically about that, as there's partnerships with human capital and other types of capital that can really think about what can we do collectively. And it's from an economic imperative as well as, I think, a moral imperative that we can do this. Thanks.
Tom?
Yeah, one thing I forgot to mention, and this is just me as a social reformer thinking, I think we can have more leverage on workforce issues if we work with local partners and look at smaller cap local employers. And actually, I think most big companies have at least have in place an infrastructure that looks like they're trying to make progress.
Right.
That's not the case for smaller cap companies and smaller companies throughout California. And I think if we found some local partners and we're really aggressive on that front, them knowing we are shareholders and that they're talking to real shareholders, I think we could make progress.
Excellent. Thank you. We got one more. Don't leave yet. Paul.
Well, I think the other thing is that a lot of the ways in which companies do help in this area is not only hiring people, but doing things like internships, doing things like sponsoring scholarships, and so I think there's a lot of different ways to engage companies in doing things to move forward on these issues, and I hope we're looking at sort of that broad range. I mean, when I was partner in our company, we hired people, we had internships, but we also had a very big scholarship program that we did every year and followed people through their time in college.
Great. Thanks so much for your work, Anne, Mary. Welcome to the CalSTRS team. And right. Looks like we are Deborah. Review of investment committee reports and time cycle. You guys couldn't have come up with a more.
I might need some caffeine.
It's at the end of Friday at 3:00. We need something a little more catchy.
Drinking my old coffee for this.
One quick note, Anne, before you walk out the door. I know for this board member and for potentially other board members, when there are events that talk about diversity or that are sponsored by CalSTRS, or I'm really interested in the 30% Club, and I know that you're doing a lot of work with that. If there's a chance to send out maybe an email to the investment committee, and if there's opportunities for board members to participate, if that's appropriate, or it would be some of the things I've read about. I'm like, oh, it would be interesting to come sometime. So obviously, no obligation for investment committee members, but it might be helpful just to kind of apprise us of events that we might be interested in, since there's clearly some interest on our board about this issue. So thanks, Ann. Okay, all right.
Thank you. For the record, Deborah Smith, Chief Operating Investment Officer, and with me is Sandra Poe from Reed Smith. This is an information item, and I just wanted to let you know it's a continuation of this discussion that we had in November. In November, as you recall, we talked about a 3-step process to change our investment reporting format and structure. The first step was to review all of our reports, and we've done that. This agenda item talks about step 2, and there's 2 key points that we've done in step 2. We have both agreed, staff and consultants have agreed on the 4 common core categories listed on an INV 274. So we both agreed on that. And then what we did is we took those 4 categories and we assigned them to each report listed in attachment 1. And attachment 1 starts on INV 276. So what we're ready to do is to move to step 3, if that pleases the board. And step 3 is to provide a more comprehensive review on report content and frequency. And we want to bring that back to you in June. Also in step 1, you'll see that there's a preview assessment of step 3. You'll find a green indicator and a yellow indicator. And again, it's a preview assessment. We're going to do a full comprehensive review and come back to you in June. But the green really tells you that we're thinking that status quo, we don't need to change anything with those reports. And the yellow indicator says that we're going to look at those reports, the report content. Today's meeting, you have 24 items, and this is you have a lot of your semi-annual reports during this meeting, and you have reams of paper. How can we give you that information in a different way? So we're going to look at that. Not only did Reed Smith and General Counsel participate in this discussion, but also Amy McDuffie from Aon Hewitt, your board governance consultant, did as well. So with that, I will address any questions you may have.
Are there any questions? Joy?
I guess just a request that if we change the frequency of some of these reports, that we have some ability to revisit the area outside of the regular reporting frequency, should there be some unforeseen circumstance that we have to address.
So what we would do is we'd come back in June and give you a proposal, and we wouldn't change anything until we got agreement from the board on the changes of the report content and or the frequency. And if we do decide to make any changes in June, that will subsequently affect the investment policy and management plan and the investment asset class policies in the reporting section. So we won't do anything until we actually vet it in June. We want to work together and bring you a proposal, and let's discuss it in June.
I
would add that most of the things that are marked in yellow, what we've done so far is looked back at the source of the responsibility where these reports originally came from, and these are largely areas where the reporting that's actually happening has grown larger or more frequent than the source of the obligation originally contemplated. And there might be reasons, experiential reasons, why you'll say you'll want to continue that, but there might be an opportunity to cut back.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul?
Thank you. This was a great amount of work, and I appreciate this. My question was on number 22, which is the investment cost effectiveness. So the routine report description says evaluates the costs of the investment program and compares them to appropriate peer groups. Now, remind me, but I thought the last time that in the past when this came to us, that there was a peer group comparison with using this, I think, the CEM data, but I don't think that we had that the last time. So can you explain to me how we're going to be doing peer group comparisons going forward?
Thanks, Paul. This report description represents historically we used CEM and we had them come present and they would give peer group comparisons. Last November, when we did the investment cost report, the committee asked staff to do that. So what we did is we used some of the data that we would provide to CEM and we produced a cost report for you. Going forward, we will present that staff, that investment cost report instead of the CEM coming in and giving you a presentation. So I can update that description.
So is it, going forward, is there going to be a comparison with peer groups, or is it
If you so desire, we can give you a comparison. Last November, I believe it was Madam Chair and yourself asked for staff to provide that information, and that's what we did last November. This year, if you'd like us to do something different, we can do that as well.
It's not a matter of who's providing the information, whether it's CEM or whether it's staff. It's whether there's a comparison to peer groups.
Correct.
And
so
that's the question I have. Because here you've got a green, so I was assuming that you didn't think there was anything to revisit or to change, and I was
So the green is we're going to continue to do that annually. The request that we got for the November reporting period for the investment cost was not to do a peer comparison. So if you want us to do a peer comparison, we can do that.
Okay, I don't know if this is the right
forum
to discuss that, but I think that's an open question that I think we should discuss. I mean, I think given the importance that we have identified, with our cost reporting project, and how the committee took action to ask that it be enhanced and that we see more information. Perhaps it's an open question when we see the report, which I think is going to be
We're shooting for July. We're
hoping for July. Okay, so maybe at that time we consider at that point whether we want more in the report or what kind of follow-up reporting. But I would just like to flag that as maybe not a green, but something that we need to revisit.
Okay, great. We can change that to a
I
yellow.
think the question for me would be, how do we know where we fall in terms of fees unless there's a comparator group?
Right.
To me, there needs to be some kind of point of reference, so that would just be my only input. But it sounds like we can wait till July and make that decision. Frank?
Some of the reports that are marked green have no requirement in law or in policy, but are just there by board practice. Are those reports you think you might want to take a second look at to see if they're still needed?
Yes, we're going to do a full comprehensive review. This green yellow was just a pre-assessment, but we will go through and look at every single line item to determine, do we need to change something? Do we need to change the content? Do we need to change the frequency?
All right. No other questions. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you,
you.
Sandra. All right. Paul, infrastructure policy revision. This is the first reading. I assume, like any other policy, we can give comment and send it back for a second reading next time, or we can change it from an information item into an action item, correct, Chris? All right.
Correct.
All right. It was a pleasure of the board. Hi,
Paul
Dilo.
Shantic, Director of Inflation Sensitive. Dilo Sheedy's Naranti to my right.
Hi, Dilo.
Judy to my left.
Hey, Judy.
And Stephen at the far end.
Judy Chambers. I know everybody
Judy
knows
Chambers.
Judy Chambers, pension
From
consultant.
PCA in New York.
With that, you have the item in front of you. I just want to highlight a couple of things. Some of the major changes that we made were changing the public assets to a more public benchmark. In this case, the MLP portion of the portfolio, and moving the discretionary limits from 100 million to 250 million. And there were a few other small changes within there, if you have any questions, I think we're ready to answer them.
Looks like I'm in. I don't see any questions, so I guess the question is for the committee, whether the committee would like to move approval of this at this time.
It's informational.
Right, but given that it's a policy, it's a first reading, but we can always decide that we want to move forward and dispense with a subsequent reading. Isn't that correct? Okay, so we can have it come back for a second reading and maybe still have no questions, or maybe somebody could suggest that we approve it now if anybody would so.
Since there are no questions, I move approval.
Okay, second? Okay, great. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Great.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, Paul.
It's okay.
I thought you would be talking for at least 3 more minutes. I'm sorry.
We already approved it.
Oh my gosh, Paul, I just leave you alone for a minute. Mr. Vice Chair, thank you, sir. Number 19. Thank you. All right. Hi, Stephen. Welcome back.
Thank
Glenn?
you, Madam Chair. Before you, we have a couple of modifications to the innovation policy. And if you'd like, we can go over it, or we can open up for questions.
Let me just see. Are there any questions about the policy? Harry.
Stephen, can you just summarize the key points in the revised, the proposed revision?
Yes, be happy to. I'll go ahead and have Glenn Blasé, who is leading the efforts.
Just the high points.
Okay, sure.
Yep, there's only 2 small changes. So the first one is with commitments. So per our policy is we have a maximum strategy limit of 50 basis points. And so we're just proposing that we use commitments at the time that the trade is made to determine whether or not it's within that tolerance of 50 basis points. And the reason we're using commitments rather than market value would just be to keep from being whipsawed in and out of compliance once we make an innovation investment, right? So if we made an investment to a strategy and even if the total plan, went down 10%, and let's say this strategy didn't go down at all and we were right at that maximum, then just through market movement alone, we would be out of compliance. The second change is just to make sure that we have daily limits, and we're just specifying daily limits rather than cumulative limits on our trade limits.
And do our consultants have any reservations about the change?
Stephen, you're okay?
If there are no other questions, I'd move for adoption then.
Okay, it's been moved. Seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? It's approved. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
All right, Chris, the work plan.
So we talked about this a little bit
work
before.
plan we've been referring to.
Normally this time of year, we'd give you a survey or a list, and you guys would add to the list of projects you wanted to vote on. Then you would vote on June of which projects you want to do. Paul and Sharon had proposed that we already had a pretty full plate, which is something I've been, I think, barking about for a couple of CIO reports. And if you look at IMV 319, I tried to do a graphical presentation of at least how I think were the instructions you've given us in terms of hierarchy and importance. And the investment committee projects, it's important to emphasize they overlay all of those other things. So we've got all that other work to do and accomplish. Really, the carryovers, obviously, as we discussed, the investment beliefs are easily going to carry into the offsite, maybe even November. The cost reporting project, I hope we complete in July, but we still are, it's pulling the data together and taking time. Subcommittee, Mr. Unterman's comment about it ending, that was news to me, but subcommittee is scheduled to go through next year. with 4 more meetings, as well as this coming May. And then obviously you've discussed the idea of the RMS Global Equity implementation. What I came, at least popped right into my head, was we could easily add that about every other meeting is have an RMS implementation open session and closed session report. So we can tell you what we can publicly say and tell you where we're at and keep the membership informed. And then in closed session, we could talk about names of the managers or any gritty details of, who are the strategy, what are we going to do next. So right now, if you, unless you want to add to the list and vote on some subjects, they're proposing this as your main 4 project areas for next year. It also was discussed and I think highlighted in the Mercer study that our 21 risk factors are fairly, I wouldn't say antiquated, long in the truth. Yeah, long in the truth. They've hit, they're past their maturity. They're like a fine wine. They've aged. How about that? And the idea that after the investment beliefs, you may want to take a look at the 21 risk factors. Our stakeholders would certainly like to see you do that. And so that obviously would be a very lengthy project into next spring. So one, just from a staff perspective, we fully support their recommendation. And even just these 4 projects are a heck of a handful for us. So I would plead that if you add more to the plate, we will probably break our back. So
I guess as the chair of the committee, I just wanted to check in with the investment committee. I know this is different than how the process we typically take, but wanted to get your input. So, Harry.
I'm comfortable with the 4 that are listed, and I think they're worthy of I don't think we should vote a final decision today because it's April and really this is for July, so I may have some different thoughts.
Sure.
There are 2 issues, though, I have an interest in, and others. I think the one you just raised around the 21 risk factors. I'm not so sure that has to happen in this structure. It might be something that the subcommittee works on just next year as a thought. There's one topic that I believe is worthy of our study and increasing our collective knowledge about, and that is the moving to a lower carbon economy and the implications for the globe and growth, where growth will take place, how quickly it may take place, where it's going to slow down, who the winners will be, who the losers would be. And I'm not sure if it falls here in this work plan or the board's work plan or where it actually falls, but in the limited reading and understanding of the issue that I have, there are thought leaders in finance, in public policy, and in academia, all who are putting forth very compelling arguments that there's this, and innovation, and the role that innovation is playing in all of this, that are saying that this shift is taking place and it's happening, and that there will be implications that inevitably will affect institutional investors. I'm far from comfortable in my own knowledge about it, but I'm convinced by people who are speaking about this that it's worthy for us. And I don't know if it falls, if we should do it here. I don't know if we just have a one-day offsite where we invite speakers to come in and talk to us about it. But I want to put it out there to the committee that I think we would benefit by learning more about this topic.
And you do have, you brought back for a while the Investment Insights series. If you remember Al Gore, then Tom Steyer coming in and speaking. We had to suspend that last year about this time just because the agendas got too full. But you could always bring that back. And I guess I hearken back to the words of Tom Steyer, which is it just really is difficult to predict. So I would encourage you to embrace that as an education of and hearing different theories, because I don't think anybody does quite have it nailed down, because there's so much speculation about what you have to assume what governments will do and what potential innovations may happen. But I think that would be very worthwhile, particularly the ramifications. I know Jack knows quite a few people in the insurance industry that have done a lot of work about trying to estimate what the impacts could be, what will that future potentially look like, and when. So it's one thing to say the seas will rise, but it's a whole other thing to say how much and when is this going to happen. And I think that would be very helpful to have a whole series of discussions and to educate the investment staff, because we get very much in our world and we get snippets of that, but not the real thought leaders and some of the futurists that are thinking about these issues of what does that new economy look like out there.
So my comment has more to do maybe with the execution of the work plan than the topics on it, but I agree. I'm comfortable with what's on the work plan. I know there's been a lot of discussion yesterday and today about oversight of the RMS and the shift that we're doing with our assets. One of the things that I think other committee members who are on the subcommittee have discussed, and from my observation from going to one of the last subcommittee meetings, was, being in an open session, but in a more relaxed, casual setting, and without the constraints of moving from one agenda item to another, as we sometimes are in these committee meetings, just allows for people to, sort of engage in more of a dialogue. So if there's an opportunity to have some of that discussion in that kind of a more casual forum, I think that might be helpful.
Yeah. Great. Any other input from committee members? So we'll take those comments, the potential off-cycle casual RMS and the low carbon conversation that Mr. Keeley mentioned, and kind of try and tweak that so that we don't approve this work plan until June, right, Chris? Is that right? Or
July.
July?
Yeah, normally the investment committee would select what it wants, recommend to the chair, and the chair would present to the board in July.
Okay. Great. Thanks. Okay. Let's see. Review of information requests. Lamont, what do we have?
Let's see here. During the discussion yesterday, item number 3, Mr. Unterman asked to see the current market value of the return needed to achieve the assumed rate of return by like 2044, I think was really the ask. And then during the discussion of item number 7, Mr. Keeley asked the CIO to provide a geographic representation of the revenues relative to the portfolio exposure by country. That's right.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I just wanted to get additional information about our exposure around the private prisons, and I wanted to see if the committee can just get additional information.
Is there something specific do you want to know what our CalSTRS investment allocation is in private prisons? Is that what you're thinking? So that seems like something you could find out and...
We have it.
Oh, we'll look at that.
Staff heard you talking about
There you go, Nora.
if you want it now. So in the global equity exposure, the portfolio is about $12.7 million. It is divided between 2 companies. And I want to correct what I said. I said one was a large cap, one was a small cap. It turns out they're both now small cap companies, meaning they're in the Russell 2000 index. Roughly about 7.5 million in one company and about 5 million in another. We do have 2 smaller bond position holdings in each, about $250,000 and then 1.7 million. So our combined exposure to the private prison companies is 14.6 million, predominantly, as I said, just the fact that we own the U.S. market, they're in the index fund. So about 12 million. Yeah, no, from the research we've done, Jack mentioned about the private markets. From the research we've done, it looks like it's these 2 primary public companies. One is involved in other business lines. One is primarily just a private prison company.
Great. Thanks. All right. our next item is looking at the agenda for June, the draft agenda. So Chris, we have the investment beliefs, continue that conversation on there.
Yeah, and it's going to change a bunch. So we need to put the investment beliefs on there.
I saw something on there.
Yeah, step 2. You're right. I have scribbled all over mine so badly, it's hard to read it. Makita mentioned they wanted to come back with a private equity attribution analysis. So we put that on there. We would not need to do the work plan objectives. We would need, the subcommittee is going to meet in May, so there'd be a report of the subcommittee, and then obviously Deborah's investment report timeline.
Okay, great. Any other comments on the agenda, draft agenda for June? Seeing none. Great. And now opportunities for statement for the public. Seeing no one, we are going to adjourn from open session. So those of you from the public that have been visiting us, I think they might have already left. But we're going to, oh, hi, Jennifer. So Jennifer, have a nice weekend. So those of you who are members of the public, we wish you a lovely weekend. Bye, Pat. We love you, Pat. Pat Geyer. You're wonderful.
And Randy Diamond, our reporter from
Randy Diamond.
Pension and Investments.
Have a nice weekend, Randy.